Good morning. Thank you both for coming in. We talked to Ed Vaizey when he was Culture Minister and he appeared before us about how to prove or disprove USO speeds, because it's become very clear, hasn't it, that the speed that BT claims is frequently disproved by objective testers. So I'm interested in knowing, in a dispute between consumers and the provider, how does the customer complain? How is the dispute investigated? And who determines the facts? Who decides that BT's claim is fantasy rather than reality and gives some sense of justice to the consumer?
So maybe I can say a couple of things and Patricia may want to come into. I think this is one of the most powerful tools we can give to consumers is speed accuracy. And I know Ed has been very frustrated, and we had lots of conversations on this. One of the things we are doing, and some of the committee may have seen the Connected Nations report, which we published last year, and there'll be a more granular version in December, is to test actual speeds on every single line in the country. So these aren't estimated speeds, these are actual speeds tested. We've done this previously by postcode. We're now going to be doing this for every, or indeed have done this for every home business in the country, which we will publish in the middle of December. Now, if the speed you think you've purchased is not the speed that you're getting, we've introduced some important voluntary codes, both for residential consumers but also this year for small and medium-sized enterprises, so that if there is a big gap between the speed that you set out in the contract and the speed that you're actually getting, there is now recourse for you to leave your contract without penalty.
Okay, can I just ask you, big gap? What is a big gap?
So big gap. So what's set out in the code is that if the speed that you're getting is essentially at the sort of bottom 10%, so it's a starting point at the bottom 10% of the possible range, then you could quit without having to pay the penalty for a contract if you're tied into a contract.
So they're allowed to be dishonest, just not very dishonest.
Well, I think this is a really important starting point. 18 months ago, there were no codes at all, and we are simultaneously working with the ASA, with the Advertising Standards Authority, so that there is more transparency and more honesty in terms of the advertising in the first place. So
but not a lot of honesty there, because as you say, that's a big gap. So if they claim 100%, but the reality is only 11%, you've got no redress. You have to fall into the bottom 10%. So they can be 90% out.
So as I say, so the code I think it's an important start, but it's not the whole picture, which is why giving consumers and business people individual data on their own premise, their own home, not least if you're moving home or you're thinking about where to start up a business, will give people much, much more accurate data.
But just to clarify, if you're in the bottom 11%, you have no option here. You have to be in the bottom 10%.
As the code stands, that's correct.
Right, so even if they've claimed that you've got brilliant speed and the reality is that you're in the bottom 11%, you can do nothing about it.
As I say, as the code stands, that's right, but remember,
that's not good, is it?
As I say, remember, even 18 months ago, this wasn't even in place. So I do.
Yeah, so all you're saying is it's better than really terrible.
I think I guess what I would say, it's an important starting point, but it's not the entirety of what we're doing to try to give consumers better information and better recourse, so they've got more choice between.
And what do you mean by voluntary code?
It's a code that we have agreed with the main providers, Virgin, Voda, BT, and so on.
So their adherence to the code is voluntary.
That's right. So this has so far been set up on a voluntary basis. I think it's interesting to see that the providers themselves have thought this is important enough to sign up with their competitors and with the regulators.
Right. So they don't have to abide by it.
Well, if they don't, of course,
exactly,
the next step becomes inevitable. And one of the advantages of a voluntary code is that you can probably get it faster, because there is, it's a no-brainer for any telecoms company that doesn't like what the regulator mandates to hold you up in court for 3-4 years. So a first prudent step is to see if you can get agreement. So, of course, if that code doesn't work, we would have to move to mandating.
Okay, so but as things stand, just for consumers who are watching this and listening, as things stand, there is a code, but it's a voluntary code. The providers don't have to abide by it as things stand. And the code is so weak as things stand that you can be in the bottom 11%, and even under this weak voluntary code, you have no redress. So the companies can basically deceive you to a massive degree, and you as a consumer have no redress.
What you've got is the...
Is that wrong?
It's not quite right. The fact that the companies have signed up to it is voluntary. Having signed up to the code, it is then binding. But your core point, which is this is a important first foundation. But if that was the entirety of what we're doing as a regulator to ensure that consumers have got accurate data about the speeds and quality, as I say, there's more that we are doing to fill in the space for consumers.
But ultimately, all you can do, even if the voluntary code works, and even if you're lucky enough to find yourself at 9% rather than 11%, all you can do is walk away from the contract.
But before the code, remember, you couldn't walk away from the contract and you'd be liable for a penalty. So it is as I say, this is not the full journey, but it is, I think, a positive step forward. But I think on top of that, I think the data that we are now doing, so you can go in for your individual home premise business and have the confidence that the data you're getting, whether you can get a decent 4G signal, whether your broadband is of a certain speed, as the regulator, we are putting together that data so you, in a reliable way, which I hope that the public can trust.
Ms. White, you must know that people will be screaming with rage listening to this, because if you've been promised 100% and you've taken out a contract on that basis, and you've only got 11% or 12 or 15 or 50% of the promise, you have no redress under the current terms that you're discussing. I can't think of many areas of business law where you're allowed to so deceive customers and get off with it.
As I say, it's been an...
Except you say it's a starting point.
It's an important starting point.
But as things stand.
As I say, I would also talk about a very important new reform for us, which is around auto compensation. So again, the committee may well know that the telecom sector has been a sector which has not, where consumers have not been able to get sort of automatic redress when things have gone wrong. You have it in gas, you have it in electricity, you have it in water. We are the first regulator, we announced as part of the DCI in February, where consumers who don't get a good enough service shouldn't then have to knock on the door or ring the phone of their provider to get redress. We think it's incredibly important that we are able to put in place a system whereby people get an automatic check in the post or a credit.
Okay.
That's got to be seen, I think, probably the most significant consumer step that we can make, that when things go wrong, there is a more automatic redress for consumers, whether that's speed or whether that's
service levels.
I'm sure we'll return to this. Can I touch quickly on another issue, which is mobile roaming rates in other European Union countries? Now, at the moment, they're regulated and prices have come down strikingly. We all know that. When we're on holiday, we're not sent these monstrous bills anymore. How are UK customers going to be protected from exploitation after Brexit?
So one of the issues, obviously, as the committee will know, is that as a regulator, we operate both on the telecom side, but also in terms of our broadcasting rules under the EU framework. Clearly, it is to be seen what the set of rules are that we'll be operating under when the European legislation gets repatriated. we set out that there are some things that really matter, i.e. that consumers, British consumers, continue to get at least as good protection as they currently have under the framework. So roaming will be part of that, the country of origin principle. How that works through, and clearly the time frame and so on of Article 50 is still to be seen. But
so this is just another bit of Brexit vagueness, is it?
I wouldn't say Brexit vagueness. I wouldn't call it vagueness. There's some very specific areas that we need to ensure that British consumers are protected.
No, I understand what you want, but of course we all want the same thing. But have you any evidence whatsoever that what you want will be delivered?
The UK has been very influential in the setting of the European framework. The competition aspects, some of the consumer aspects have been strongly influenced by the UK. And the expectation, because the European framework is a legal framework which is passed into law in this country, the expectation is that the Brexit process will simply confirm the existing situation insofar
whose expectation?
So your point about, I mean, we will be continuing to engage both actively in Europe over the next 2 to 3 years, not least because, as you know, there's a big reform of the digital single market proceeding, but on the areas that we think matter most to British consumers, on the regulation of telecoms, including roaming, we will be and are having very constructive conversations with the government as they decide how to prioritise.
So you'll do your best.
We will do our best.
And hope for the best.
We will do more than hope for the best. We will do our best.
Can I just